welcome everyone. The rest of the world is taking President's Day off. Thank you so much for doing this switch with us so that our guests could see the children. Anyone can do a pretty school. I really wanted Dr. Gardner to see your children, to see our teachers, and to see us in action. And it, I'm sure, took a lot to make that happen for you in your schedule, so I appreciate it so much. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. Dr. Gardner is gathering his thoughts. He's de-Wendenizing probably. And you've all been there, so. Okay, that's not that funny. And then he's going to come and speak. Before we bring Dr. Gardner on, I want you to understand how this occurred, and the students as well. I did not phone Harvard University and say, oh, we have this warehouse and we turned it into a school and we're using your theory. I know they would hang up. That isn't how it happened. We do what we do, and we do it well, and we do it with all our hearts, and we do it every day. And when you do that, I truly believe the universe delivers exactly what you need. And what happened was, one of our parents commented in Europe about this school that their children were attending and told a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Abraham. And Mrs. Abraham is here right now. And they came to see the school. Actually, she came, and then she dragged her poor husband on a 2-hour tour. And I thought I frightened them, I was certain. And then the phone rang, and Mrs. Abraham said, we have a gift we'd like to give you. And I said, all right, what would that be? And she said, we are going to have Dr. Gardner come to see your school. And I couldn't believe it. And what's so wonderful is what we tell you, students, is we don't believe in external rewards. We don't really want to have things and objects to get gratification. And what the Abrahams did by offering us this was they followed suit, everything we believe. They gave us an experience to remember that means so much to all of us. And that is just perfect because it's what we teach you. This is more powerful than any object anyone could give me. This is a memory for you to keep. The man that's going to speak today is the creator, the author of the theory of multiple intelligence. I started teaching children when Corey was 3 and Kyle, and I wasn't sure what I was doing. All I knew was I was having the best time and celebrating each child. And we got a call from Tallahassee 4 years into having the Little Bay preschool. And they accused us of teaching the children the IQ test because too many were leaving our little school and testing gifted. And I panicked. I wasn't doing that. And a principal from up north, my principal, Larry Walsh, flew down, spent 2 weeks in the school, and watched what we did, Mrs. Dunlap and I. And he said, you know this has a theory, a sound theory, and it's called multiple intelligence by a man named Dr. Howard Gardner from Harvard University. Who knew? And so we fine-tuned it, and we started reading materials and doing workshops and going to conferences. And you know, the rest is history. We became a multiple intelligence school. So I love that we were doing it intuitively. And now I love that it's being celebrated for what it is. It is the way to teach children. It is the way to make dreams come true. So I am so honored. Who gives gifts like that? Thank you so much. What am I going to give her back? I gave her an embrace. Without further ado, I would like to introduce 3 students to you. The grade 9 reading group has been studying Dr. Gardner's theory, and as part of their assessment, they wrote speeches on Dr. Gardner and the significance of his theory to them and their lives. There's no better way to understand what this school is about than through our students. So I'd like to introduce you to the 3 students that were selected by a panel of parents to come forward and tell us about Dr. Gardner. Actually, we're going to sing first because, oh, good, there he is. Oh, things are working out. Oh, but I haven't even slept. You have no idea. Mrs. Maria, where are you, my darling, my darling? Okay, come save me.
This is it, this is it, this is it, this is it. Ideal school, ideal school, ideal school, ideal school. This is the best imagine that a place like this exists. Ideal school, ideal creative school that grants each and every child's wish. Ideal school, innovative learning is our cardinal rule. Take an endless journey at the ideal school. See what you can do at the ideal school. See how you can grow at the ideal school. See how you can learn in so many ways. See how you can be at the ideal school every day. This is it, this is it, this is it. Ideal school, ideal school, ideal school, ideal school. This is it, that those learning hand in hand, you and me. Ideal school, ideal school. Because it covers the depth of knowledge we were all meant to feel. Ideal school, ideal school. And within our kingdom there is a magic everywhere. At the ideal school you will explore, you'll grow, you'll care. See what you can do at the ideal school. See how you can grow at the ideal school. See how you can learn in so many ways. See how you can be at the ideal school every day.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Costa. Before I begin, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and go to a happy place. Are you surrounded by nature or people? Perhaps you're by yourself. Maybe you're painting or playing basketball. Do you hear music and rhythms or talking and laughing? Open your eyes. Think about what you saw. Everyone saw different things that made them happy. That is one of the ideas behind the theory of multiple intelligences. Everyone has different things that they are attracted to and skilled at. Those things are called their intelligences. But society has a different view on that. Let me explain. Society doesn't think that people can show their intelligences in different ways. They think people are intelligent if they can solve math problems or logic puzzles quickly. An example of this is the IQ test. How many of you have taken an IQ test before? If you have, you might have been labeled as gifted, average, or even mentally retarded. Those labels, although just words, have so much power. For those of you who haven't taken an IQ test before, the test makes you do math problems, logic problems, and other things. At the end, you will be given a number that is called your IQ, or intelligence quotient, and it will stay with you all of your life. That's all fine and good, but does that test truly measure a person's intelligence? Should you be labeled based on those simple questions? Does this test deserve so much power? Howard Gardner asked himself those questions and realized how mistaken society is on the measurement and definition of intelligence. His thoughts were the seed that grew into the multiple intelligence theory. This theory states that people can be smart or intelligent in 8 different ways. He concluded that the IQ test only measures people's intelligence in 2 of the 8 intelligences. Here's a little story I heard that helped me understand that. Here in the United States, Dr. Soderwood would be considered very intelligent and be labeled gifted. Now, a person in Alaska who didn't have a good education may be considered unintelligent or below average. But if they were both trapped in a snowstorm with only some trees to survive, who would be the gifted one there? Yet, the Alaskan man, although deemed unintelligent, would be the gifted one in that situation, and Dr. Soderman would be the one have a cold. It is the same idea with multiple intelligences. Dr. Howard Gardner found that this problem was happening in schools too. Some children who were creative or talented would fail in the traditional school system. In their school, a teacher would read from the textbook and write notes for lessons. These children were failing in the system because they weren't taught the way they needed to, which was through pictures, movement, music, or nature, to understand and remember things. Their school didn't supply any of that, yet it was the struggling child who was blamed. Our school, however, is different, because instead of just copying notes from the board and reading from the textbook, we play games, do things in groups, draw pictures, and create songs to help us learn the lessons. For example, I have learned that I am strong in musical rhythmic intelligence, so when I had trouble remembering all the formulas for math, I made them all into a rhyme. Now I can recite them all without any problem. As you can see, learning the multiple intelligence way doesn't only mean having the teacher teach the curriculum in the 8 different intelligences. It also means figuring out which intelligences you are low at and what you are stronger at so you can teach yourself. When we go to high school, the teachers will probably teach us just by standing at the board and talking. It will be up to us to go home every night and turn that day's notes into something that we can easily understand and memorize. I will also have to realize my strong intelligences and my weak ones, and that knowledge will help me choose what college I go to and even my career. I have been very lucky. I got to learn through the 8 intelligences all my life, and even when I leave this school, I can continue that myself because I have learned how I remember and understand things the best. I'm very thankful for that opportunity, and I only wish that other children and other schools could have that too. Who knows though? Maybe one day all the schools will learn through multiple intelligences, and maybe the society will stop using the IQ test to measure it. Maybe people will start measuring intelligences by all different things, like how talented, imaginative, wise, and athletic they are, instead of just how well they can remember things and solve math problems. Hey, it can happen. It's a dream, and this school is proof that dreams can come true. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Morgan Jones, and I am the 8th grader in the Dream Middle School. Dr. Howard Gardner, a Harvard professor who works as a social scientist, is the man behind the theory of multiple intelligences. Society defines intelligence by the score on an IQ test or intelligence quotient test. Dr. Gardner saw this as a conundrum because the IQ test focused on the traditional writing, grammar, logic, and math problems. Intelligence is not how much knowledge you have, but a sensitivity to and skill with certain kinds of stimuli. Each intelligence specializes in different kinds of stimuli. His theory of multiple intelligence says that not everyone learned in the traditional ways, but in 8 intelligences. Dr. Gardner also said that these intelligences are interdependent and do not work well in isolation. The intelligences are also multidimensional, which means that you may be stronger in some aspects of an intelligence and not in others. For example, someone who is strong in the verbal linguistic intelligence may be good at writing, but not at spelling. The 8 intelligences are visual spatial, picture smart. This is a person who thinks in images, has very good spatial awareness, has an eye for color and detail, likes to draw and create, and learns through visuals. Musical rhythm, music smart. This person would enjoy composing music, listening to music, learn to play an instrument, tapping their fingers and toes to a beat, humming, and singing. Silence is the enemy to a musical rhythmic person. Interpersonal, people smart. This person loves to be around and work with people, make friends, and enjoys group activities. Intrapersonal, self-smart. This is a person who really knows themselves, keeps a diary, and enjoys time alone. Bodily kinesthetic, body smart. If you are bodily kinesthetic, you may have good coordination, use hand gestures while talking, act, dance, or do athletics. You would love to move around. Naturalist, nature smart. You love the outdoors, have a garden, love animals, and pay attention to your environment and surroundings. And lastly, the traditional intelligences. Verbal linguistic, word smart. This is a person who likes to write stories, read books, work with words, and give speeches. Logical mathematical, logic and math smart. This person would be good with numbers, loves to analyze things, thinks logically, and is good at math. Practicing the theory of multiple intelligences at the Ideal and Dream School has been very helpful to me. This theory lets me take in information in a very fun and understandable way because the teachers will teach the way that I learn best. I will definitely continue using the multiple intelligences in high school because now I know myself and the way I learn. If I'm having trouble reading a book, I might bring out the naturalist in me and read the book outside. If math poses a problem, I can just put the notes to a song to remember them. I would say that my three stronger intelligences are naturalist, interpersonal, and bodily kinesthetic. I love nature, people, and moving around. I'm going to keep the theory of multiple intelligences with me for my future because they will come in very handy. I can apply the skills that I have learned to do anything and everything that I want to do in my life. I just want to thank Dr. Howard Gardner and my teachers for introducing this theory to my life. This theory is going to revolutionize education.
Good afternoon, parents, friends, and honored guests. I am Amber Mitchell, an 8th grader and the president of the Dream Middle School. I am honored to be here this afternoon and to be a part of this most extraordinary occasion. It is my goal that by the time I am finished today, you will have an understanding of how you are smart and how to use Dr. Gardner's 8 intelligences every day. Are you always on the phone? Do your friends call you a bookworm? People strong in the verbal linguistic intelligence like and feel comfortable speaking publicly. They comprehend and or have an interest in other languages. They also learn best through the written and spoken word. If you might be word smart, then sign yes. Think of the positive, odd number that comes between 2 and 10. That is also the quotient of 10 over 2. If you thought 5, you are correct. People who excel or excelled in a traditional school are most likely logical mathematical. Logic smart people need an explanation for everything. They need straightforward direction and are extremely smart. If you believe that you are logical mathematical, give me 5. Pictures, photography, paints. I see that a lot of you just perked up in your seats and are looking pretty happy. Visual spatial just might be the best way to illustrate you. Picture smart people need images, physically or mentally, to understand concepts. A visual person also notices detail and learns to remember spaces better than names. If this snapshot's you, raise your drawing arm. When you entered today, did you notice the music playing? Do people not want to sit next to you because you hum all the time? Is your iPod always on you? A person who likes to listen to music can be described as musical rhythmic. They often have an interest in playing an instrument or have a good sense of rhythm and melody. They find music comforting and make music anywhere. If this denotes you, rock on! Has anyone ever called you a chatty Cathy? Do you get excited at the sight of an invitation? Do you never make a decision without consulting a friend? Interpersonal people love to be with others, and they work well in groups and understand people's perspectives. People who can put themselves into another person's shoes are also people smart. If you are interpersonal, wave hello. Alone time, knowing yourself, and standing up for what is right are just a few qualities that intrapersonal people have. Self-smart people know themselves. They like to work alone, and they connect when people ask them questions about their home life or anything personal. If any of these reflect you, nod your head. Are you always covered in pet hair? Can you say the 3 R's? Have you ever been called an earth angel? Naturalist people enjoy being outdoors and are skilled at growing plants. If a nature-smart person is inside for most of the day, they often become stressed and antsy. If you can be classified as a naturalist, put up your green thumb. I've noticed many of you are shifting in your seats, and others are balancing knees. Traditional school is probably really hard for you. People that need to move around, need actions, or even like to dance are bodily kinesthetic. They also like sports and other physical activities and have great hand-eye coordination. Bodily kinesthetics, raise your pitching arm. These past 9 years, I have been fortunate to have been taught the way I learned. My teachers have always presented concepts using the 8 intelligences. They have created songs, assigned group projects, and have used graphic organizers to help me classify information. Now that I'm heading off to high school, I understand how I learned and know what I need to be successful. I will be able to fulfill my dream to open a multiple intelligence school for the differently able. Look around you. You're surrounded by stimuli. Take the time to think about what attracts you most. Ask yourself, who am I? Please join me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Howard Gardner.
I know that applause and the standing was for the kids who were terrific. In fact, before walking in the room, I was wondering what I was going to say, but after hearing the 3 talks, I know I had nothing to say. Nonetheless, you would probably be disappointed if I didn't say anything, so I will make a few remarks. But it would be useful to know who is here. And I'm not going to go around the room, but I assume these are students who gave up their holiday to come here, which is pretty impressive. How many of you are parents of kids in the school? Well, I think that answers my question. Any grandparents here? I'm a grandparent too, but Oscar's too young to go to any school. As I think I have the names right, Jonna, Morgan, and Amber said, I'm the multiple intelligences man, but I did have a life before, and I think I might have a life after that as well. I hope that I started out as a psychologist, trying to understand how the mind works. The students at the school have heard the word cognitive a lot as being contrasted to emotional, and I'm basically what's called a cognitive psychologist, trying to understand how people think, reason, solve problems, make things. And about 25 years ago, I published a book called Frames of Mind, in which I argued, as the 3 speakers said, that the singular notion of intelligence did not really capture the range of things people could do, as well as the ways in which people differ from one another, and this became the theory of multiple intelligences. I wrote that as a psychologist. I was trying to argue with and convince my psychological colleagues. I have to tell you in honesty that the theory is quite controversial in psychology, and when we turn to questions, either from the students or from the non-students, I'm happy to talk about the controversy. I had not thought about the theory as being particularly connected to education. If you go back to that original book, which is a long, rather turgid book, there are just some pages of educational speculation. But when you release an idea, what we now call a meme, a unit of meaning into the world, one of the exciting things is you don't know what's going to happen. 99% times out of 100, it doesn't go anywhere. But occasionally it gets picked up. Even when it gets picked up, you have no control over how it's being used. And that's probably good. It would be really a form of brainwashing if you said, here's my idea, and you have to use it in this way and not in any other way. And it was actually 23 years ago, almost 24 years ago, when I was contacted by a school principal, a school teacher, not a principal, in Indianapolis, whose name was Pat Bolaños, and she said, I've been meeting with some other teachers, and we had the idea of starting a school based upon your ideas. And I was totally flabbergasted. I mean, as if somebody had called me up and said I was now a member of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It made no sense. But as it happened, I was going to visit my parents in Pennsylvania, and they were going to a conference in Pennsylvania, so we met in a small community there, and I talked with them about what I meant, and they talked with me about their ideas. And then a few years later, in 1987, they opened something which was then called the Key School, now called the Key Learning Community. And for over 20 years, the Key School has been doing its thing about multiple intelligences. And I always said, I'm the idea person, or the thinker, or the scholar, or the bookworm, whatever term you want. You're the educators, and I never had any pretense of telling them what to do in their school. I will tell you an anecdote, because it unfortunately reveals a lot. This is a public school in inner city Indianapolis, and it has existed against great odds. It started K-5, it's now K-12, and they're starting a second school, so they've been quite successful. When the school was 15 years old, there was a big celebration in the town concert hall in Monument Square, if you know Indianapolis. And all the big shots of Indianapolis were there, and lots of teachers and guests and so on. And Pat Bolaños, the very tough then principal, because she became the principal of the Key School, she got up and she thanked everybody. She said, last of all, she said, I want to thank the 6 superintendents who've been in Indianapolis since we began the Key School. Without your steadfast opposition, we would never have achieved anything. And alas, especially in the public sector, innovative ideas don't get a lot of space, particularly they don't seem to contribute to increase in standardized test scores. Now, I have nothing against increased in standardized test scores, but I would like that to be the result of a good education and not as a result of teaching to the test and attaching undue rewards and punishment to what's called AYP. How many of you know what AYP is? This will show how many of you are in the public sector. Annual Year Progress. Now you know. Then about 20 years ago, I was contacted by Tom Herr, who was then as now the principal of the New City School in St. Louis, a very different school, an independent school, K through 6, set up in the late 60s as a magnet school, particularly to bring black and white students together. And it's a school that has made MI very central to its existence, focusing particularly on the personal intelligences, which Tom Herr and his staff think are really absolutely central to any kind of community that he would live in and I would like to live in. And those are the 2 schools with which I've had real contact over 23 or so and 20 years respectively. It's a long time. There are now many schools all around that wrap themselves in the MI story, and whenever I find out about them, I'm interested, and when I can visit them, as was the case today with the Ideal School and the Dream School, I'm happy to do so. In fact, my hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, is actually a school called the Howard Gardner Discovery School, based in MI. I've not seen it yet, but on October 30th this year, I'm going to go visit it. It'll make my mother and the rest of the family, I think, happy. And because these ideas, I hope this doesn't sound like preening, but I think it's interesting, because these ideas have actually taken root in many countries all over the world, we're actually putting out a book called Multiple Intelligences Around the World. And we have contributors from 25 or 26 different countries. A couple from China, Japan, a couple from Korea, Turkey, Chile, several European countries, several Latin American countries. And it's quite dazzling to find out the different ways in which they make use of the ideas. And just like Key and New City are very different, you can really imagine that an MI school in Finland, we have an article in Finland and one from Norway, is going to be very different than one in Argentina or one in Philippines. In fact, there are 2 articles in the Philippines. So it's really quite exciting. And I think that in that sense, I was probably well advised not to say, this is how to do a school and this is how not to do a school, but rather to throw those memes out and to let people, including Wendy and Chris Sauterman, make the use which they thought was appropriate for their kind of school, their value system, their country, their clientele, rather than what I might have thought. In fact, in my memory, in 25 years, I've only once actually publicly opposed what somebody was doing in the MI name. And I'll tell you that story because I think it's instructive. I think you students might find it interesting. Back in about 1993, I was sitting in my office and I got a letter. Let me tell you what a letter is. You know, it's a piece of paper folded in an envelope. This is relevant. And it was from somebody in Australia. And it was somebody I didn't know. But he wrote and said, your ideas are being used in Australia and you're not going to like the way that they're being used. So I wrote back, again by letter, and I said, please tell me. And then literally, he sent me a stack of papers like this, and it was over a foot high, of different kinds of documents from one of the states in Australia. And the man was absolutely right. The more I read in these documents, the more angry I got. And when I finally came to a chart which had all the racial and ethnic groups in Australia and the intelligences that they had and the intelligences that they lacked, as if anybody could possibly know that, I really hit the ceiling. And I went on television in Australia. I said, this is pseudoscience. There's no support for this at all. And very happily, that program was canceled because it was using my ideas in what I would have to say was a perverted kind of way. But other than that, my ideas have been there for people to use, and I'm educated and thrilled and honored that people are able to make use of them. So I'm going to make just a very, very few comments because I walked through the school for an hour, and then I would love to hear your thoughts, frankly, especially from those of you right in front, but also from the ancients who are sitting behind you. First of all, and I have to always say this, it's presumptuous to make any kind of a informed statement about an institution when you've only spent an hour there. You can imagine if somebody randomly walked into your home for an hour and then gave a speech in front of 300 people about what your family was like, or walked into your business right after there'd been a bad report that came out. I think one has to be very humble in making comments based on only an hour. But let me tell you what struck me. First of all, I think at this pair of schools, because they are the dream and ideal and are a pair, there's a real effort to be a community. And that means for people to know one another, to have a relationship to one another, to share certain ideas and beliefs and values. There's a list of values, there's a mission statement. And I think people really know that information, and I think they make an effort to realize it. And that I'd be very surprised if that was simply a deception. It looked to me like it was genuine. So that's one thing that struck me. A second thing that struck me was that when the curriculum is presented, whether it's in the literacies or in grammar or in social studies like civics or American history or in computing, there's an effort made to draw on the different intelligences. When it's appropriate to sing, when it's appropriate to use body movement, when it's appropriate to depict it or to handle it spatially. And that's very nice because all the research suggests that you're more likely to understand something if you can think about it in lots of ways. And especially the way that I understand something may not be the way that you understand it. So the more, I call it different windows into the same room, even if you're all trying to understand what the subjunctive is, and one of you know that you were working on the subjunctive when I walked by your workbook, there's no holy way to learn about the subjunctive. There's lots of ways, and the more those different ways can be activated, the better. The other aspect of multiple intelligences is the extent to which each child as an individual is taken seriously, and the extent to which, whenever possible, we try to teach each child in a way that is comfortable and in a way that that child is most likely to be able to learn, remember, and use. Now, I didn't have much of an opportunity to observe individual learning or instruction. How could I in an hour? But I was able to see not only the language of multiple intelligences, but also people using it and referring them to themselves. I saw the set of doors which you pass by when you are on your way to graduating, where you have a chance to characterize how you think and what is your particular strength. So I have a feeling that individuality is something that's honored here, though again in an hour I certainly couldn't observe it. There was one other thing that I noticed, and I'm going to conclude with this because I think it's a difficult issue. We might call it a sticky wicket. And that is that there's a determined effort to have a very positive atmosphere in the school. You're not supposed to be negative. You're not supposed to diss anybody else. You're supposed to be polite. And many young people came up and greeted me, and even a few teachers came up and greeted me. You're supposed to laugh there. So I think there's a very nice, optimistic we can be healthy, we can be responsible, we can be happy kind of atmosphere. Now, what's sticky about that? Well, the world is in many ways very messy. And there's lots of awful things going on. And all you have to do is turn on the television randomly, and if you don't see mayhem covered in the news, you're certainly going to see mayhem covered in the shows with the big ratings. So in many ways, the school is a kind of, we might call a positive cocoon, one that serves as a contrast to much that is happening in the world. I guess the real question and challenge is you cannot be a dream and ideal forever. And you eventually do step out into the community and into the highway and into areas of the city which aren't so safe. And you learn about people who do terrible things on college campuses, on battlefields all over the world. And I think the hope has to be that the strength that you get here and the positive outlook can be kind of an inoculation to help you deal with some of these situations and maybe help to ameliorate them. What, of course, we don't want is for people to be Pollyannish and to be naive about what you're likely to encounter, not just when you become an adult, but even when you go on to secondary school. So I think that's the real challenge of creating something which in many ways is ideal and dream, rather than things which reflect some of the rather messy and sordid realities. I'm not going to make a political speech, but I know that in 7th grade, the kids are studying civics, and I asked whether there's some interest in the election, and I was told there was, and I'm not going to announce any particular candidate here, but there is a chance that we might, in this country, move things a little bit better, and I hope that we can all be around to participate in that. So that's the end of my, obviously not very much prepared remarks. And I know there's food out there, and I know people have other things to do, but I'm here for a while, so I'm very happy to hear questions or comments, and I'd love to hear if any of the students have any things that they want to ask me. Yes, sir? Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
I was wondering, what was your multiple intelligence?
Great question.
Your name is? Justin, okay. Hi, Justin. Justin wanted to know what were my intelligences. Well, of course, the theorist never allows himself to be tested, right? But I'm happy to give you an answer, because I've been asked this question before. I would say that my strengths are probably language and music. I was a quite serious piano player when I was young, and I could have gone on to be a musician, but I decided to become a scholar instead. I think that I'm perfectly okay in logical mathematical. I'm not particularly good in spatial or bodily. And what is interesting for me is I think that I wasn't very good at interpersonal intelligence, but I've been working on it for 64 years, and I hope that I'm getting better. And that's one thing about intelligence, is they're like muscles. You can get them better if you use them, but as you know, if you don't exercise, you get flabby, and then you become less good. So thank you, Justin, for that question. Anyone else? Yes?
What inspired you by getting the multiple?
The question was, what inspired me? And inspired is a very nice word. I think it actually means breathing in. Was there a moment where you, MI theory, right? And I guess there wasn't a moment, but I can tell you exactly why I came up with the theory. For many years, I used to work with two different groups. One group were kids like you, especially kids with interest in the arts and music, because I'm very interested in the arts. But I was also working with patients in a hospital who were once fine, but then had a stroke. I don't know if you know what a stroke is, but it's damage to your brain, and when you have a stroke, something can go wrong. You can lose your language, or you can lose your ability to find your way around, or you can lose your ability to reason. And every day as a researcher, I would see kids who would be good in one thing but not another, or patients who lost one ability but maintain another, or vice versa, You might find somebody who lost language but could still sing. You might find somebody who could lose their musical ability but still talk. And so I said to myself over and over again, this notion of a single intelligence with everything being glommed together doesn't make sense. People must have different kinds of abilities, and you can be strong in one thing and weak in another, and so on. So that was what we call the intuition. That was the inspiration. But then I spent 5 years studying what we know about people's psychology, what we know about their brains, what we know about their genetics, what we know about different cultures. What do they value in Africa? What do they value among the Eskimo? Like that story we heard, right? And then I set up what I call criteria. Criteria is kind of like a checklist. And I looked at all the possible things human beings could do, and I made a check if each of those different lenses, the brain lens, the gene lens, the psychology lens, the culture lens, if they registered for a particular ability. And I eventually came up with a list of the 7 intelligences, to which I added another one. Now I'll tell you something a little bit funny. It's a little bit grown up. It's kind of PG-13, but I think you kids can take it. One of my students said, Howard Gardner doesn't recognize the cooking intelligence, the humor intelligence, and the sexual intelligence because he doesn't have any of them. But that's just a joke.
How did you come to the thought that there was a problem with the IQ test?
That's a very good question. And it's a question that has not been asked to me very often. He said, how did you discover that there was a problem with the IQ test? And the reason this is a very good question, your name is? Alex. Is because when I began to work on multiple intelligences, I never even thought about the IQ test. I had taken IQ tests a long time ago. I did perfectly fine enough, but I didn't care about them. And the idea of these different abilities or talents came from my study of children and my study of people who had strokes. So I wasn't even thinking about the IQ test when I started. But a big step, and this was kind of the inspiration thing, was to call these things intelligences rather than talents or abilities. If I called them talents or abilities, I wouldn't be here today, because I wrote a book called 7 Talents, nobody would have paid attention. It was the use of the word intelligence which got everybody's attention. Because he said, oh, he's attacking what I think smart is. So, then I began to think about the IQ test, and this is where I get to your question, Alan. I said, what are the questions in the IQ test, and what do they tell you? And when I analyzed them, as some of your classmates said, I said they're almost all questions about language, like what does a word mean, or what's the opposite of something else, or they're questions about logic, either whether you can do math problems, or whether you can figure out what to do, say when you find a wallet on the ground, and you have to decide whether you keep the money or give it to somebody else. So I said the IQ test is a test of language and logic, which is what you need to do well in a certain kind of school. But once you leave school, it's not really that important. In fact, and this is a joke, you could even become president if you're not very good in language and logic. But the criticism of the IQ test is not to say that it's a bad test. It's rather to say there are lots of things which are very important. Not just things like art and music, but also things like courage and creativity, which are not tested at all by the intelligence test. And you can have a very high IQ and be either somebody who does nothing, kind of a couch potato, or even somebody who's quite evil. Because being good in language and logic doesn't make you a good person, it just makes you a good test taker. So in that sense, I became a critic of IQ tests, but that was after I had done the work, not initially, and that's why it's a good question. So why don't we take maybe 1 or 2 more from the students, and then we'll give the old folks. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Right down the diagonal. Yes?
Is there another intelligence? Because I was hearing that there was a new one, and I'm just a little bit confused about that.
Well, to tell you the truth, your name is?
Kayla.
Kayla. People are proposing new intelligences all the time. I had a slide of financial intelligence. There's a whole book about that. I said, if you have financial intelligence, you don't need the other ones because you can hire all the other ones. And there are books about spiritual intelligence, social intelligence. So many people promote them. But as I said earlier, I had a kind of a list of a checklist of what needs to be in intelligence. And I'm very conservative in adding new intelligences. So I only added one, the naturalist, which is lavishly displayed here, but I'm toying with what I call the existential intelligence. That's a very big word, but the meaning is not that difficult. Existential intelligence is the intelligence of asking big questions, like, what is life? When does life begin? Why do we die? Why do people fight? How can we make people better? Those are big questions. And there might be a separate intelligence for that. The evidence I'm looking for is, are there parts of the brain which particularly deal with questions like that? So maybe in a few years I'll have a better answer. So I'm thinking about it, but I don't add them very quickly. So there was a diagonal. Who was the second person in the diagonal? Yes? The intelligences? Yeah. Well, I wrote my book 25 years ago, so this is the silver anniversary of the book. But when you're a scholar, which is what I do, I think about things and I do research, things usually take a long time. So I've been working for 10 years with children and with stroke victims, trying to understand them before I wrote the book. So if I could change your question a bit, sometimes people say to me, how long did it take to write the book? And I say the answer could be 6 months, but it could be a lifetime. Because 6 months is just took me how long it took me to type the words. But of course I'm drawing on things which took much longer to. So if you run a 100-yard dash in 12 seconds, right? And someone says, how long did it take you to run so fast? You could say 12 seconds, but you could say 10 years because you've been working on it for 10 years. Okay, there was one more question, all the way in the corner there, yeah?
I was going to ask, do you think that there are going to be a lot more intelligences if people study them over the years?
Good question. Young man is asking whether there are going to be more intelligences in the future. And I think there's two answers to that question. You implied one answer, namely, if more people study this topic, they might discover ones which I would say, yes, I never thought of that, but that should count as an intelligence. But the other thing could be is maybe you know about evolution and how human beings change over time. You know, we're different from the cavemen, and they were different from the hominids that walked the savannas of East Africa 100,000 or a million years ago. And it could be that as human beings change, as we continue to evolve, new abilities will develop. And I have a very good colleague whose name is Batro. He's from Argentina. He's got a chapter in that book. And he thinks there's a new kind of intelligence emerging called digital intelligence. And digital does not have to do with fingers. It has to do with bits. Because in computers, everything is digital. Yes, no, on, off. And he says maybe with the passage of time, that's the kind of intelligence which will become much more important because so much of what we do is on computers. So that's another reason why we might have more than one intelligence. Well, I think you kids actually gave the best testimony to your school because you asked very good questions and questions that showed you've been listening and thinking. So I guess we should give the old folks a little time, and since I'm one of them, we'll see if their questions are as good. Ooh. Well, they're all hungry. Okay, wave your hand if you have yes, right there. Woman in the back? Yeah. Can you stand up?
Is there any research being done or a following on the children that are studying this theory?
Children who are?
They're studying this theory, the MI.
Oh, but stand up because I have to paraphrase your question. Are you asking whether if we identify children's intelligences, whether they change over time? Or are you asking if kids go to schools where these theories are being used, what happens to them? Yeah. Well, I can give you an impression answer. And it might surprise you, but I think it probably would surprise the administration here less. One of the things which they found in the Key School was that a lot of the students who went there became leaders in secondary school and college and so on. And it wasn't particularly because leadership was being trained, but rather the school became kind of a fishbowl, and many, many people came and visited, and I went around and I shook at least 20 hands, and several of the kids, including the 3 you heard, were explaining the school to you. So I think it gives you a lot of presence, a sense of self, a sense of how to communicate with others. There's a book called Multiple Intelligences by Mindy Kornhaber, Kornhaber, where she studied 41 schools, and she documented the change that took place in everything from attendance to self-esteem to how children's learning abilities were dealt with to how test scores went. And if you look at that book, which was published a few years ago, you would actually get some follow-up data, and I find it pretty encouraging. But let me tell you a story, since you asked. About 4 years ago, I got a phone call very early in the morning from the BBC. Do any of you know what the BBC is? You know what it is?
I know it's Britain.
I
know that's Britain.
Britain, exactly. And Britain, you know, was several hours ahead of us, so it was like noon there, and it was 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning. So they said, "Hello, this is the BBC." I can't do accents. They said, the test scores in Britain have gone up, and that the Minister of Schools, David Miliband, who I think is now the Foreign Secretary, is a big deal, says that the test scores have gone up because teachers here believe in multiple intelligences. Would you go on the air, on the radio, and talk about this? So I did a little Googling, because by this time I'd learned how to use computers, and I found out that in fact it was true. So yes, at noon my time, which was 5 or 6 British time, I had an interview on the BBC. And I gave an answer which was whimsical, but also honest. I said, well, I'm delighted the test scores go up. I said, I'm happy to take credit when the test scores go up, but I'm not going to take blame if the test scores go down. And this is an answer to your question. It's very hard to know when there's a good outcome, what causes it. You know the famous saying, success has 1,000 parents and failure is an orphan. So let's take the Key School. Maybe the kids become good leaders because of MI theory, but maybe it's because they had a great principal, you know? And so I'm very cautious about making claims that good things happen because of MI, but as I said, I'm happy to take some credit if people want to give it. And these don't have to be about MI, don't have to be. Yes, sir, in the front.
Were you able to win over any of those early opponents or the controversy to your theory? These stories there.
I don't think that the people called psychometricians are ever going to like the theory. These are people whose bread and butter is making standardized tests, and I think I'm the Antichrist as far as they're concerned. But I'll tell you a couple of things. The typical pattern is, this is nonsense, nobody would believe it. Everybody knew this. Oh, I thought of it myself. If you watch people over time, it has kind of become more part of the woodwork. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and I don't say this in self-pity because I'm one of the luckiest people I know, is that when you're young and you do stuff, often people put it in a favorable light because in a way they can make some claims for discovery. When you get to be older and better known, then the rewards come, so to speak, from being attacked. And so I face the kind of funny position where a lot of people around me are afraid to criticize me, and so I get criticism, in the press after the fact. And the reason for sharing this with you in this intimate setting is one of the best gifts you can give to somebody when they've got a certain amount of visibility is honest feedback on what you're doing. And I really value those colleagues who would come up to me after a talk or read something of mine and say, I really think you didn't get it quite right. Because it's harder to get fair criticism when you get to be pretty well known. But I would say that except for psychometricians, Most psychologists have a kind of a ho-hum attitude toward it. Most educators are quite positive. What's interesting is people in biology have much more of an understanding of the theory than people in psychology. And that's because it's basically an evolutionary theory. My theory, translated into evolutionary terms, and I guess I can say that word in southern Florida, but not northern Florida, right? Is because we evolved to live in different kinds of ecologies, right? And if you live in Alaska, you have to have different skills than if you live in, in the savannah in Africa. And if you're in a big commercial area, you need different kinds of skills than if you're in an area where you just go fishing. And so the biologists understand that the mind-brain was not developed logically or rationally. It was developed by thousands of accidents and mutations over thousands of years. And as I said in response to the last young man, as our environments change, different kinds of abilities will be favored and not favored. And so it's more of a biological way of thinking. For most psychologists, and I imagine some of you are psychologists, if you haven't got the paper and pencil test to look at it, they're not interested. And my theory is not a paper and pencil test kind of theory, because if you want to assess an intelligence, I believe, you have to look directly at the ability and not through the lens of a paper and pencil. If I want to know if you have social intelligence, I don't care what answer you give to a test question. I want to know if I put you in a group of 10 people, can you convince them of something which they don't believe in? That's a test of social intelligence. Okay. Yes, gentleman there, and then, yeah.
Dr. Gardner, my name's Henry Heller. I've got a 4-year-old son here. Originally, we're going to move back to Massachusetts just for the schooling. Well, my wife found ideal school. Needless to say, we're not moving anywhere. I got a two-part question. My first part is, being in the global economy that we are in today, how do you believe the U.S. student compares to the rest? And my second part of the question is, MI being as proven as it's been for, at least for us, do you believe that federal government or state government would ever implement a curriculum that would make faster?
Well, I didn't say this directly this afternoon, although I hinted at it, but this morning when I gave a talk at the convention center I did. MI can't be the basis of a curriculum. It's rather a way of thinking which informs a curriculum. I mean, this school here has a curriculum, to some extent set up by the director, to some extent set up by the teachers, and then the question is, how do you infuse it with multiple intelligences ideas, which I think are basically two. One, to what extent do you individualize? Number two, to what extent do you teach things in lots of ways? I think hell will freeze over before our federal government would endorse either of those things. I always say that Winston Churchill said the American people always do the right thing after we've tried every other alternative, and I think that's what's happening in our federal systems. In the states, there's more variety, and I think there's some states that would be more predisposed to these ideas than others. The book that I guess you're either going to be given or buying, I don't know what the deal is about the kinds of minds needed in the global era, so it's very much focused on that question. The question that you ask can't be answered directly, but it can be answered in a kind of a parable. And that is that the United States is three quite different systems. One system is the inner city, which is under duress, and the kids are not being well served in any way. A second is the heartland, Kansas, the parts of Massachusetts which I don't know, Springfield, Worcester, so on. The third are the kids of privilege, which are our kids whose parents make a good living, who go to a school where there's lots of resources and so on. Each of those is a different world. But when you see the international comparisons, of course, you just see the means. You don't see the variations, the deviations. My work argues, and I believe this is true, but it's strictly an impression on my part, that the problems in those three systems are fundamentally different. The problems in the inner city are excellence. How do we get kids to be literate, and disciplined in the sense of mastering the disciplines. That's the problem there. And of course, No Child Left Behind, right or wrong, is trying to address that. The problem is it's using the rest of the country to address that. I would say it's using the world to fix the problems in Detroit. That's nuts. The problem in the heartland is engagement. If you ask kids to finish the statement, school is, the answer is always boring. Schools get turned on, kids get turned on, but not by school. They get turned on by video games or things which are more or less destructive, depending on how lucky they are. The problem in the suburbs, in the wealthy part of our country, and you're not going to like to hear this, but the problem is ethics. The problem is people cutting corners and doing things that help them, but not the society. And since I'm in a better position to do working with the suburbs than I am with the inner city or the heartland, all of my work now is in the area of ethics. It's part of what I call the Good Work Project. But that's a whole other topic.
We don't really feel this government is going to embrace a multiple intelligence way of teaching versus the standard tests. What do you say to the children here, some who have not had the good fortune to be immersed in this school's philosophy of teaching for many years? Let's say they have 3 years or 4 years. What can they specifically and most importantly take on to the next, to high school and hopefully college from this type of teaching that can get them through that lecturing and sitting and writing on the board stuff that's done in regular school?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I asked the student leaders who are with me out there, what schools they're going to go to afterwards. And of course, if you have a choice of schools, it's nice to send kids to schools where there's some understanding of the philosophy here, but not everybody has that option. Because I don't have a good answer to your question, I will tell you a parable. It's actually not a parable, it's a true story. The most respected principal that I know is a woman named Debbie Meyer, who was the principal of Central Park Secondary and Elementary School in Manhattan, East Harlem. And then she went on to become the principal of the Mission Hill School in Boston. She's a wonderful principal, and she's a well-known educator. And starting in 4th grade, she tells the students about Mrs. Brown. Now, if I call this a parable, because Mrs. Brown is a mythical character. Mrs. Brown doesn't exist. But Deborah takes the students through exercises on how Mrs. Brown would handle a question and what answer she would give. And Mrs. Brown is actually ETS, the Educational Testing Service. And Deborah, whose philosophy could be not more alien from standardized testing, is using that as a way of getting kids to understand that they may have to perform in ways and do things which may not be their preference, but it's part of surviving in the society. And of course, all of us know this because all of us live in a society which asks us sometimes to do things that we don't really want to do. This morning, I quoted William F. Buckley, who memorably said, to get the right answer on the SAT, you don't have to know what the right answer is. You have to know what the schnook who works for ETS thought the right answer was. And there's a certain test kind of mentality. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end with one more Deborah Meyer story, and I'll stay here for a few minutes for people who have just questions I didn't have a chance to answer. But Deborah Meyer is even older than I am, if that's possible. In the 1930s, she used to go to Yankee Stadium to watch Joe DiMaggio play. How many of you kids have heard of Joe DiMaggio? Wow. He was a very great baseball player, and he was also married to Marilyn Monroe, she was the Britney Spears or Paris Hilton, a little bit better than that of her day. Now, Deborah Meyer would go to her brother to watch Joe DiMaggio play. Now, her brother watched Joe DiMaggio because he wanted to be a great baseball player, the Yankee Clipper, who hit in 56 successive games, got a base hit or higher. Deborah, of course, wanted to fall in love with marry Joe DiMaggio because he's very handsome. And thinking about schools, Deborah Meyer says to students, we've got to be their Joe DiMaggios. And I think all the questions that are being raised about inner city and SAT and so on, those are realities. But what we have to do as teachers and educators and parents is to be figures who our kids admire and want to be like. And I'm going to close with a wonderful line I just read last week from James Baldwin, the great novelist. And you kids will get a kick out of this. James Baldwin said, kids, he said children, shouldn't use the word kids. He said children never listen to what their parents say, but they invariably do what their parents do. And so it's how we are that's the real message. So thank you all for coming and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all very much. It was a very, very interesting lecture. One that wasn't, we just did it impromptu, which I'm you should be proud of yourself. Go look in the mirror. I'm not so gifted as you. I have trouble with the verbal linguistic part. But we have a little gift. We have a gift for Professor Gardner. If you could come back up here. Wendy has it prepared, and Bianca's going to give it to you. But we really did appreciate you coming.
It says, multiple intelligence is the key that opens the door to lifelong learning and dreams coming true. Ideal and Dreams by Ray.
Mrs. Abraham, could you come up, please? Oh, stop, I give a choice. Have you met me? I have, and I asked you not to do this. I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. We thank you, what you're doing with these children.
The Abrahams also supplied all these books for all of you. Howard Gardner's latest book, which you are free to take one as you leave and read it at your leisure and enjoy it. So thank you. I wanted to thank all the students for doing such a wonderful job today, and the ones that are being so patient and well-behaved here. And the speakers, they just blew me away. I'd never seen them speak. I didn't see them do those speeches ahead of time. And they definitely have multiple intelligence, all of them. Thank you again to all our staff that work so hard with them to make them this way. Thank you for all of you parents for coming today and supporting the school and seeing this wonderful presentation. We have a lot of out-of-town guests as well from Canada and California that are sitting up here that made a special trip just to see this, so we appreciate that. We also have some guests from local and Florida universities and colleges that are here. I welcome them and thank them for coming. Let's see if I forgot anybody. Thank the administration. Thank you all for coming and really spending this wonderful time with us. We really have looked forward to it for many, many months, and it's finally come true. So thank you.